Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. So I'm here to give you a brief overview of using the BMCC library databases to conduct research papers. This video is primarily recorded for my English 201 class working on Othello projects, but it might apply to you no matter what you're working on. So the first thing to remember is that library databases are not as easy as Google. You have to expect it to be difficult. It's hard because we are used to just like typing into our internet browser or asking Siri for answers and coming up with really quick results. Often results that only really skim the surface of the information that's out there. Our library, CUNY's library and BMCC's library, spends thousands and thousands of dollars every year subscribing to information that, for better or for worse, and some of us might argue for worse, is only available to people with library institutional access. So try not to rely too much on Google, and do expect this to take some time when you're researching new projects. And the other problem with Google is, as I'm sure you've heard in the past, you don't know that you can trust all of the sources that a Google search is going to bring up. So I'm not going to tell you that everything you find through the BMCC library database is going to be reliable or particularly helpful, but the chances are much higher that if you learn subject-specific strategies, and you will be able to more quickly produce high quality sources that are going to help you write really excellent research projects. So I'm, of course, coming at this from an English perspective, but you need to also become familiar with databases in your own field. If you're in criminal justice or psychology or social sciences, you will have a different set of databases. So first of all, of course, is just getting to the BMCC library. And I know I just told you don't Google, but here I am. This is my very fancy way of finding the BMCC library. BMCC library is what I am Googling. um, so it comes up the top search item happily, and here we are on the home page. So you could use OneSearch to produce some sources, and that would probably, yeah, that throws together books as well as databases. Right now, during the COVID crisis, we don't have access to physical books. It's very difficult. So we're going to be relying mostly on online sources. So the way to find the databases is you click on this database tab, and you can follow along in your own computer, to make sure you get the muscle memory to learn these sorts of things. You can either click on databases A to Z, which, as it sounds like, is just alphabetical. But you can also take note of the fact that in the right-hand corner here, you have popular databases. So this is where you realize that, okay, a lot of people use Academic Search Complete to research for their papers, and that's because it is kind of a master database, like the Google of databases, that combines together a whole host of different subjects and journals. So it's kind of like it's a really large umbrella for a lot of different databases. JSTOR is a favorite of mine, and I would definitely recommend JSTOR for papers for English classes. It's reputable, it's peer reviewed, and you can and it's easy to search. It's one of the good ones. Okay, I'm going to mention, since it's sort of bothering me, that one of the nice things is at any point during your research process, we actually have librarians who are hired and available to chat with you about your papers. So maybe you're a little bit afraid to go to your professor and ask a question, or they're very busy or whatever. You can just go to the library database website, and you'll see this little box, and you can say, click chat now, and you should be immediately linked up with a librarian. Actually, if it's what I understand it to be, this might, oh, it looks like it's actually the BMCC library, but sometimes you'll end up chatting with a librarian on like the other side of the world, depending on what time you're logging in, because they have their own sort of internal network, which I think is pretty cool. But I don't need to speak to a librarian right now, so I'm going to click no thanks. By the way, I'm just going to point this out, continue to mention that we do have access to the New York Times free through the databases, so you can click here, although I think you need to register. OneSearch is another aggregated database, sort of like Academic Search Complete, that tosses together a lot of different fields and sources. So it could be a starting point for you as well. People love opposing viewpoints in context, but I actually hate this database because I think from what I've seen, it tends to really simplify complex issues down to like pros and cons, and that could be helpful for you, but I prefer to think of issues as not black and white and less binary. So I would not recommend opposing viewpoints in context personally, because I think it simplifies things, but other professors may disagree, and so it's up to you. Okay, so this is how you find databases that are listed from A to Z. Another way is you can click on your specific subject. So, or if you go back, databases by subject, say you're in criminal justice and you click here, click go, and then here's where you find all the databases, including the same ones that are kind of popular across fields, listed together, so you can have a look. It looks like there's a specific database that's looking at gun regulation and legislation, which is interesting, or international security and counterterrorism. It looks like we have some access to legal literature and government documents, so you can do some sleuthing around. Or military and intelligence database collection. I mean, this all seems really interesting. NYPD crime statistics. There's a lot, and especially maybe over the summer, if you're thinking about what major you want to transfer into, you could just spend some time looking through this wealth of information and see what piques your interest. Okay, I'm also going to introduce, we have some guides. We have very excellent librarians and professors at BMCC. So this is another route you can take at the initial stage of your research. Here are all the guides. We're going to go by subject and say this is a literature class, so English and literature. And we actually have, it's mostly composition. There are a couple other 300 level classes. I guess I should see if I should get my class in here, but we have Introduction to Literature as one of them. And so that's pretty helpful if you're a 201 student watching this video. And it has some advice on picking a topic, although I don't find that it's very well fleshed out. I think what's maybe more helpful is it has things like Gale literary sources, which is going to be, okay, so it looks at the MLA bibliography. Again, it's just going to help you get to the point where you can start searching for reputable secondary sources for your final papers or whatever paper you're looking at. I'm not going to quite click on this yet. There's also a tab here for citing your sources. If you're really intimidated by citations, here we have a tab for MLA style, and it just breaks it down. Like, it's not as overwhelming. I do also recommend websites like the OWL at Purdue, which I think it'll probably have. Yeah, we love it here. The Purdue Online Writing Lab is pretty exhaustive in how it shows you how to cite basically everything, including like YouTube videos and tweets and that sort of thing. But this has just like the most common basic citations. And so it goes over, okay, if you're looking at a physical book, you start with the author's last name, then the first name, then the title of the book, then the place where the book is was published. Actually, yeah, I think they're working with an outdated version of MLA, but that's okay. I will forgive them. I don't think it needs to be perfect. The publisher's information, and you don't need to say press. You can like cut out some of that extraneous. You don't need to type out university. You can just say U for short. And if it's like Norton Press, you only need to write Norton, or here Routledge, and then the year. Okay, so that's for a book. If here we are, we're in Shakespeare right now, so this is a good, your citation page would say William Shakespeare because he's the author, then the title of the play, maybe for us Othello, edited by Barbara A. Mowat. Oh, also, yeah, okay, Mowat and Werstein are kind of like the king and queen of Shakespeare editing. So it's the same editors, and then New York, Washington Square Pocket, which, or whatever information you find in here, and then the year. But anyway, journals, you can find out information about how to cite them here, although it might be easiest for you to just click on once you get into once you find a journal article that interests you, you should be able to automatically generate the MLA citation for that. I don't want to get too deep into this, but one other thing I will mention, and maybe you already know this, is there's a library guide on primary versus secondary sources, which could be helpful if you're a little bit confused about the differences between them. And also this one on the difference between scholarly and popular articles. And that's pretty, I know that there's a lot of confusion that students have about the difference. So one basic distinction might be that if you find an article about a topic freely online through some popular magazine or newspaper such as the New Yorker or New York Times or, I don't know, Slate or Wall Street Journal, that is a popular article versus, and sometimes these popular articles will draw on research that has been laid out in the scholarly articles. So that means that popular, and you can use popular articles in your research papers, you just have to be aware that you're not necessarily getting as close to the source as you could with them. So if you want to do further research, you could look up, for instance, some of the studies that the popular article is citing. And that's, when you get to graduate level work or whatever, then you really want to not rely, the less you can rely on other people, other experts to explain and digest research findings for you, the closer you get to the source, the higher the higher up you are on the scholarly totem pole. So that's why it's more like maybe graduate level work. But popular articles tend to be shorter with broader overviews of topics, with fairly easy to understand vocabulary. They might have glossy photographs, and sometimes they might not be written by experts, but by staff editors who are reading experts and kind of extrapolating from them or translating them for you. And generally, this is key, like a popular article might not have a bibliography, even though they might mention certain sources. You can't like scroll to the bottom and see a list of footnotes or works cited or whatever. Versus scholarly articles that the next video that I'm gonna post for you is going to go deeper into. Those are longer with detailed analysis of topics. And sometimes they will be very structured. They might use pretty technical language or jargon, and they're probably written by an expert or specialist. So you can Google the name of the person and see if they are affiliated with some kind of university or maybe a graduate student, something like that. Versus someone who like works for the New York Times. And it might include a lot of graphs, tables, charts, and it will definitely have a lot of documentation with footnotes, endnotes, and a bibliography. So that's just something to be aware of. And the difference between primary and secondary sources, I'll just say quickly for this class, Othello is our primary source, Shakespeare is our primary source. The text, the literature that we are reading is the primary source that we're holding up for analysis. Secondary sources or secondary literature is what I'm about to walk you through in terms of using JSTOR or OneSearch or whatever to find modern scholars or experts who are interpreting Shakespeare for you. So there's another level of distancing here. All right, so hopefully you can keep watching. Go on to video number 2 about using JSTOR and finding secondary research.